Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to one and all. This is the 22nd monthly online guest lecture organized by the research scholars of the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies at Goa University. Our guest and speaker for today is Professor Madhucchanda Sen, and the talk is titled How I See Myself, Self Portraits, and Aesthetic and Epistemic Purism. A few announcements before the talk. The event, along with the contents in the chat box, is being recorded. The participants are requested to keep their microphones on mute throughout the lecture, which will go on for about 50 minutes, after which there will be a question and answer session. May I now call upon Miss Sandra to kindly introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Sia. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, I take an immense pleasure and honor to extend a warm welcome to each one who is present over here. It is indeed a privilege to have Professor Madhucchanda Sen among us, an esteemed scholar and expert for today's topic, how I see myself, self portraits, and aesthetic and epistemic purism. Professor Madhucchanda Sen is a professor of philosophy at Jadavpur University, where she has been teaching since 2011. She taught at Bharati University from 2001 to 2011. She was educated at Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and University College London. Her major areas of research interest are philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, critical thinking, and epistemology. She was a faculty member of a module on critical thinking under Project Equal. Jadavpur University, funded by EU. She works in the area of computer aided learning of critical thinking. She was a visiting professor at Department of History, Cultures and Civilization, University of Bologna, Italy, April 2017. Her publications include Externalism and the Mental Introduction to Critical Thinking, Logic with Merlin and Edison and Pramod Nair, Critical Thinking, Academic Writings and Presentational Skills. Ma'am have also co-edited many books. Knowing her work, we are truly privileged to have you share your insights with us. We eagerly anticipate your lecture to surely spark curiosity and encourage innovative thinking among the audience. We welcome you, ma'am, to our department.
Thank
We,
you.
I also welcome Professor Koshi Tarankanam, the Dean of School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, and all other faculty members of the school. All the other research scholars and students who are here present of the university, as well as the thinkers and the professors who have gathered over here and come here to attend this lecture. I welcome everyone. Without further delay, let us embark on the enlightening journey together. I am confident that today's talk will leave us inspired, informed, and motivated to make a positive difference. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Ma'am, over to you.
Namaskar. I'm truly grateful to the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, Goa University, and especially to my dear friend, Professor Koshi Tharakan, who I'm sure is instrumental in introducing me to the research scholars there. Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Vidya, for coordinating with me to organize this thing. Today, I shall be speaking on seeing oneself. That is how I see myself. And in doing so, I shall be concentrating on a particular form of art, which is self-portraits, in form of paintings as well as photographs. And I shall be addressing two kinds of theses that I find in aesthetics and in epistemology, and I call them aesthetic purism and epistemic purism. Um, I uh, I have written this paper in a rather personal way. So I start with an apology. As a student of analytical philosophy, for years I have tried to address philosophical issues in general and issues relating to self awareness in particular in a somewhat impersonal fashion. I have tried to look for objective and true answers where it actually makes no sense to seek them. I have now turned to art for answers that make real sense to me. Artists have no such obligation to be objective or impersonal. Yet I do believe that in many cases and in many significantly philosophical matters, they are more likely to be near home truths. The issue at hand is how I see myself, and I want to really emphasize on the verb see. The form of art I particularly look at is the one that we find in self portraits. The reason is obvious. Self portraits embody the way the artists see themselves, or at least self portraits are supposed to embody the way the artist sees herself. In this paper, I intend to counter two kinds of purism in aesthetics, and a kind of epistemic purism that seems to be prevalent in philosophical literature regarding self knowledge and self awareness. I take self portraits as a kind of case study that shows how these two kinds of purism have to be at least dubious, if not entirely wrong. The purism in aesthetics that I'm addressing here is a view that was held by Immanuel Kant. He believed that aesthetic perception must be pure, that is, and I quote, free of all interests. It is believed that the aesthetic properties of a painting lie purely in its form, in its color, in its composition, its medium, and of course in the dexterity with which the artist employs her painting skills. To see paintings as expressions of artists' persona would be, under such a view, under the purist view, absolutely wrong. However, I think that this kind of aesthetic purism is unable to address self portraits as a truly distinctive art form. Such a purism fails to see in a self portrait the artist cannot be anonymous, but is ever present and is present with all her histories. Self portraits may be seen as essentially a species of fiction, and their aesthetic appreciation, at least partly, though in some very significant way, is an appreciation of the fictions that those self portraits embody. In philosophy, we are keen to know how we see ourselves and what is it that we are aware of when we are aware of ourselves. Because it seems to us that even if we do not go into metaphysical theories about the self, we have to make sense of this phenomena of self awareness, and we have to at least admit something as the object of such a phenomena, that is self awareness, object of self awareness. Self awareness is regarded as an unique kind of awareness, as the subject is reflexively presented to itself in some kind of authoritative manner. Epistemic purism regarding self awareness seems to suggest that we do indeed have a privileged and incorrigible access to ourselves. Another view that is associated with this sort of epistemic purism is this. We seem to think that the thing that is presented in self awareness is just a mere subjective presence, a kind of, inwardness, nothing more than that. But if self portraits are depictions of how we see ourselves, then this kind of epistemic purism cannot be acceptable. This is the position that I am going to defend. A study of self portraits as records of how one sees oneself will help me to show how aesthetic purism and epistemic purism regarding self awareness cannot be entirely correct. Okay, so this being my main objective, now I go into the body of the talk. So I'm raising the question, who is it that I'm aware of in self-awareness? I seek to understand who is it that is presented to my consciousness when I have a kind of mundane self-awareness. And I had to be very cautious because Koshi is here, the Husserl expert. So I'm really only talking about mundane self-awareness, Koshi. It is often said that in case of self-awareness, the distinction between appearance and reality is obliterated. How the thing appears to us and how the thing really is, the distinction that we often make in epistemology and metaphysics, that seems to obliterate in the case of self-awareness. The self is as if presented to itself, because how else could it present itself to itself? Almost tautologically, the presented self in self-presentation is, of course, the presented self. What is interesting is that we might agree with the claim that there is no distinction between appearance and reality in the case of self-awareness, yet we might not quite make the claim of incorrigibility. What may be more important to understand is that we are becoming ourselves through our acts of self-awareness. And I repeat, we are actually becoming the being that we are through the acts of self-awareness. An act quite similar to that of weaving a tale or weaving of tales. And there is no correctness or incorrectness in the act of weaving. There is only styles in which we may weave this or that tale. And also note that I am not privileged to tell my story because it is my story. I do not own the style in which I choose to tell my tale. It would be wrong to think that this style or these styles are unique because they are mine in some very private sense. They are mine, definitely, but I have made them mine because I have, as I go along the way, picked up styles of weaving the tale about me, the tales about me. I weave the tales from my interactions with my friends, my family, my students, my colleagues, even my pets. The tales I weave are as much tales told by others as they are mine. Purism about self awareness would counter this, as it stems from the thought that self seeing reveals a person without any personal history. In fact, reveals the person without anything that is personal. That is personal. It is as if the I that is revealed in I seeing or self seeing is just an I, a very thin I, just like the letter I, very slim and very minimal. It is just this I, not this or that, or this of that, or that of this. But I see myself as a person without taking myself personally? Is this I a person? Can I see a person, the person that I am, without taking myself personally? Isn't that what taking personally means after all? I cannot even start to think of distancing myself from the person I take myself to be. Self seeing, hence, is bound to be, messy and bound to be rich in texture, as self seeing is never just self seeing. Along with self awareness, there seems to be a kind of preparation of becoming a self rather than becoming an I, a slim I. It is really becoming the person that one is. And this process of becoming involves a great deal more than a kind of detached, ahistorical awareness of some kind of inwardness, a mere subjective presence. That is not who I am, or that is not who I know when I see myself. It is true that the inwardness of consciousness epitomizes self awareness. Consciousness is not only directed outwards, but also towards an inner existence. Most philosophers would say that this consciousness of an inner existence, a subjective presence, constitutes self awareness. And it is this self awareness which makes me become the subject that I am. Now, in psychological theories, great deal of importance is attached to, this becoming of a subject. And it has a great significance in the developmental history of a person. And I do not deny that. But I would like to counter three assumptions that are associated with this idea of a subject. One is the claim about self awareness. There is a prevalent view that rudimentary self awareness is one in which we are aware of ourselves in an unattached, rather passive fashion, almost like seeing a patch of color without realizing which color it is, a mere given. Then there is the claim of incorrigibility regarding self awareness. It is believed that there can be no scope of error in self awareness. It is argued that since it is received, self awareness is a kind of passive reception of this inwardness. So it has to be correct because it isn't distorted by our interests, by our emotions, by our predispositions, by our concepts. And then there is a claim about the self. It follows from the other two claims that uh, the self that is given in self-awareness is just the subjective presence. And we often take strange examples to vindicate this claim. We are asked to imagine a person who, due to amnesia, has lost all autobiographical memories. It is then said that that person may still retain a minimal I sense, and it is this minimal I sense which captures true self awareness. I find this thought experiment purportedly revealing the kind of depleted self really, really uninteresting. I feel that moments of acute self awareness, moments of being truly self conscious, are the ones which need to be looked into. Moments of great shame, moments of abject grief, moments of soaring pride, moments of desperate desperation. These are the moments that we have to look into. I would like to further claim that these moments of acute self awareness are bound to be evaluated. And I really mean what I say. Understanding oneself as a subject of one's conscious experience does not happen automatically. This awareness is initiated by a kind of socialization. And if that be so, then we may be tempted to say in the Wittgensteinian fashion that the self awareness is not distinct from the awareness of other things after all, other things that we need, socialization to be aware of. However, it is true that we do feel that we are given to ourselves in a unique way. And I'm trying to really, this is where what I really want to say comes. Now, what constitutes this uh, uniqueness of self awareness, or at least the felt uniqueness of self awareness? Till now, we have thought that our awareness of ourselves is unique because only we ourselves can be given to ourselves subjectively. But I ask you to consider this. Maybe the uniqueness lies in the fact that I am presented to myself both as a subject and also as an object for other subjects. This is where the uniqueness lies. My full subjective awareness actually comprises of both these elements. I can be aware of myself both from the first person perspective as well as the third person perspective. My living of my daily life, my negotiations with my life circumstances are in a way possible by the ability to adopt these dual perspectives. I am able to see myself as an inward, through an inward, look. And I'm also able to see myself from the eyes of the other. It would be difficult to live my life unless I had this understanding that this thing that I can access through first person perspective is the same person that others access through third person perspective. This is what is unique to me. I also need to understand that the other that I access through the third person perspective is one capable of accessing herself in first person perspective. That is when I really acknowledge the other as also a person like me. In instances of acute self awareness, there seems to be a split. And this is what is unique about our awareness about ourselves. I see myself with the judging eye of the other. And then I realize that this person seen with the eyes of the other is me, the one I access as the first person, as me, as I. And it is then that I soar with pride or shrink in shame. The egologicality that is involved here, give me a second. The egologicality that is involved in these moments of acute self awareness makes them the moments that they are, you know. This understanding of the identity of the first person and the third person, which in a very strange way also retains the dichotomy, is what is so special about self-awareness. This makes us become the person that we are. And that this is true is borne out by the fact that people who fail to understand this and fail to negotiate between these two perspectives are regarded as somewhat challenged. Nature may have instilled this ecologicality in our being as a way of self preservation. We need to see ourselves as special, but much of what we see while seeing ourselves is ourselves reflected in the mirror, which is actually the mirror of the gazing other, or the gaze of oneself as the other. So the need for being seen this way or that way by the other constitutes our ways of seeing ourselves. Our egological predicament, which gives birth to this attachment, obliterates the distinction between how we see ourselves and how we want to see ourselves. And this is where the evaluative aspect of self awareness comes. One may think that this suggests that we are eternally, under self deception. This is so because more often than not, wanting to see ourselves in a particular way makes us the person that we are. Self-projection, self-becoming, and self-awareness seem to blend into one another and result into this mad attachment that we feel with ourselves. Nature made us self-regarding because this is the only way that we could manage to survive in this earth. But this attachment, initially instilled toward us of the vulnerability, later on becomes the greatest vulnerability of all. Almost like what happens to a mother. She grows attached to her child because the child is vulnerable. But slowly and surely, this attachment makes her the most vulnerable being on earth. Now, I'm talking about self-portraits because they personify this dual, yet collapsing perspective that we need to have about ourselves to become the persons that we are. Because the self-portrait here depicts the first person in the third person. Self-portrait we must realize that this is nothing out of the ordinary. Whenever we speak about ourselves, we need to deftly negotiate with these first personhood and third personhood. However, self-portraits bring all these things out most dramatically. The self-portrait is a documentation of self-encounter that turns into a kind of self-depiction, okay? When an artist paints herself or a photographer takes a self-portrait, is she portraying some kind of an inner subject? Is a disengaged, aloof, unbiased, impersonal, uninvolved look into oneself even possible? Is disengaged, aloof, unbiased, impersonal depiction of oneself equally impossible? Self-depiction, whether it is directed towards the spectator world or the spectator I, has to be some sort of self-vindication. Our self-awareness seems to transform into self-vindication. Self-seeing becomes a self-statement. And the self itself becomes the statement that we want to make. Okay? If we look into, now I'm going into the paintings now. If we, are you all with me? Can you hear me properly?
Perfectly.
Yes.
Others also please respond.
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
If we look at the history of self-portraits, then we realize that it is rather a modern art form. What makes them remarkable is that this art actually announces the birth of the artist. They are expressions of their artistic identity. Artists who were seen as invisible craftsmen now, by owning their creations, become artists for the first time. So, actually, the first self portrait would be an artist signing his art or her art. In a way, it is also the birth of art and not just as a craft. Craftsmen who had created such amazing works of art never became artists, and their labor was never seen as an aesthetic creation until and unless they proclaimed their authorship. In fact, the proclamation of authorship by artists were at one point of time seen as blasphemous, as the prevalent religious belief was Deus artifex, that God alone was the creator. The birth of the artist also ushers in the restructuring of social relations. At the time, it also is a moment of the restructuring of the artist's identity. In claiming authorship, the artist becomes the agent artist that he or she is. And the art is what the artist makes and can make. His agency here is absolutely at the center of his selfhood. Aesthetic purism that I mentioned right at the beginning fails to acknowledge that self-portraits are indeed a special kind of art form. Aesthetic purism has sometimes sometimes argued that this idea that self-portraits embodied a distinct art form is actually a myth. Douglas P. Lackey, in his paper Rembrandt and the Mythology of the Self-Portrait, challenges the claim that self-portraits convey a special truth that ordinary portraits cannot convey. So Lackey is a purist. Lackey argues that there is no important aesthetic difference between other portraits and self-portraits. There is, of course, a distinction between other reference and self-reference, he says, but this distinction plays no role in artistic creation or aesthetic appreciation, at least in visual arts. Lackey thinks that whatever megalomaniac intentions the portraiture might have had behind the self-portrayal, it is immaterial to the aesthetic value of the self-portrait. He discounts deliberately he discounts deliberate acts of artists who have made self-portraits as a form of self-assertion. And Lackey is coming up with a typical philosophical thought experiment. He says, okay, let us suppose suddenly we find out that the famous self-portrait by Rembrandt is not a self-portrait after all, but it was painted by a student of his. And then, of course, the naughty teacher, just claimed authorship of that painting. So what Lackey is saying that, knowing this, knowing the fact that this is not a portrait of Rembrandt made by Rembrandt, but a portrait of Rembrandt made by someone else, does that really change the aesthetic experience that you're having when you see the portrait? He says, no, it doesn't. And that sort of vindicates the purists, aesthetic purists' point. And I am actually completely disagreeing with Lackey here. I invite you to look at some self-portraits. Okay, so now I'm going to present. Can you see?
Yes. Now.
As you can see, This is a self-portrait made by Jan van Eyck. And the painting is known as the portrait of a man in a red turban. And Van Eyck painted this in 1433. Okay. So I would like you to have a good look at this painting. Okay. And now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to talk about the painting. Okay. Is that okay? Okay. Now, one of the most famous anecdotes in art history is that on the original frame of this painting, which still survives, Eyck had inscribed two things. At the bottom of the frame is inscribed in Greek, Jan van Eyck made me on October 21, 1433. And on the top, it is inscribed the famous motto of Jan van Eyck, as well as I can. And there is a pun in the I can and I can. There is a lot of things that needs attention here. Now let us look at the painting again. As you can see that this painting
it's
is
not.
very, very, sorry?
Yeah. Now it is seen. Yes.
Okay, as you can see that this painting is very, very deftly made. And he is making use of quite a few important art techniques, one of which is the chiaroscuro technique, the technique of light and shade, especially controlled light. What he is actually doing, and when he writes the word as I can, as Van Eyck can, is saying that look at this. I am what I make. So here the artist is actually claiming himself as the creator of the art. And not only a creator, but also an extremely deft creator of the art. And that is why he's saying, as I can. Okay. I'm showing you another painting, which also is a proud depiction of the artist's ability. Okay. You can see here, this is a painting of Albrecht Dürer at the age of 26. And as you can see, I have included also his seal, which is on the right, where you can see the letters AD. This is also a kind of depiction of himself. Albrecht Dürer, not only a painter, but also a printmaker. Okay. And if you look, you will see that there is something inscribed right at the bottom of the window that you can see. Here he writes that I, Albrecht Dürer, painted myself at the age of 26 in my true colors. He says that I am painting myself in my true colors. Okay. If you notice, you will see that much of the painting is taken up by the hands that you can see resting as if on the frame of the painting itself. You can see how masculine those hands are and how powerful they look. As the arms and the fingers and the palm and the hand of the artist is actually the instrument of the artist. By putting it right at the middle of the painting and by drawing the attention of the viewer to the hands, what Dürer is doing is that he is claiming his identity as artist. I, Albrecht Dürer of Nuremberg, painted myself at the age of 26 in my true colors, he says. His pride takes a completely new level when he paints himself at the age of 28 as Jesus Christ. And he has exactly the same kind of inscription on the right. And you can also find his famous seal on the left, which also tells you that not only is he an extremely deft painter, he's also a printmaker. Here, what we see is that we are seeing pride. And as we know that we often are our pride. We are nothing but our pride. And this is the sort of identity that both Van Eyck, let us see at Van Eyck's, let us see his portrait as well. This is what Van Eyck wanted to say. I mean, look, he is a very distinguished gentleman wearing a very flamboyant turban. Only an artist can pull through such an attire. And he's looking right into your eyes and saying, look what I can. Now we are going to look at a completely different take on self-portrait. I have here the last fresco, actually, the final fresco of the Sistine Chapel, which is known as the Last Judgment, and the artist is Michelangelo. These frescoes were painted between the years 1536 and 1541. As you can see that we have the portrayal of the biblical Last Judgment moment where God is, condemning the sinners to hell and bringing the, the great people to heaven. This is the depiction of God's last judgment, but this is also the self-portrait of Michelangelo. Let us see how it is. At the right of this, right at the center right of the fresco, we find Saint Bartholomew. And he has a strange thing in his hand. Can you see it properly? Can you see it properly, everybody? Is it visible? Can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what he has is the skin of a person. And he has on his right hand a knife. It seems that he has skinned someone. As the biblical tale go, Saint Bartholomew was skinned alive. He was a martyr. And here we see Saint Bartholomew with all his godly character. But in his hand, he has, the knife which was used to deskin him. And on his left hand, he has the skin. Notice that Michelangelo deftly puts his face in the face of the deskinned skin. Now, what is Michelangelo saying here? Why does he have this, his face, on the face of this fresco, one may think? I mean, what sort of a self-seeing is this? What sort of a self-portrayal is this? Okay. Michelangelo chooses to put his face here, and many art historians have said that Michelangelo wanted to depict the melancholic dimension of his existence here, his loneliness as a genius, and the tortured folds of the peeled skin and the hollow, gnarled face seem to depict him as a kind of tortured genius. Now, here one might think that he is self-loathing, but as you can well understand, that this is a moment which is a moment of both self-loathing and self-aggrandizement. Those of us who are self-critical take great pride in being self-critical. And each act of self-loathing becomes acts of self-aggrandizement. And through each such act, we become the self-loathing or self-aggrandizing person that we are. Okay. Now we are going to look at another self-portrait. Well, what do you see here? You see a young boy who has in his right hand a shining sword, and on his left hand he has held the head of, it seems like a demon that he has slain. Is this what you see? Well, this definitely is what you see. This is a painting by Caravaggio, the painting of David with the head of Goliath. You know the story of David and Goliath. Goliath is a demon, and young David slays this demon. So young David is really the hero, whereas Goliath is the anti-hero here. Let me tell you that this is indeed a self-portrait, and Caravaggio is not David, but Caravaggio is the head of Goliath. Now, of course, if you don't hear about this tale of Caravaggio, you see this as just the painting of a young boy who has slain a demon. But there is more to it than just this. Caravaggio was known to be a man of, with a great problem with his rage. So he painted this painting right after he, in a raging, brawl, had killed someone. And then he was, of course, hounded by the police, and he was fleeing from here to there. And then he took refuge under under some great noblesman, and it is with his patronage that he painted this painting. As you can see, this may be a kind of act of self-retribution, where he acknowledges himself to be an anti-hero, a satanic demon who is capable of shameful rage and violence and who needs to be slain. This is a kind of self-absolution made by Caravaggio by painting himself as a demon. So he, by painting himself as Goliath, at the same time acknowledges his crime and also asks for absolution. The next painting is my favorite, and I want you to see it first and then we are going to discuss it and we are going to look at it again. This painting is called La Pittura, self-portrait as the allegory of painting. And the artist is a woman. The artist is Artemisia Gentileschi. And this was painted during the years of 1638 and 39. I'm stopping to present here because I would really like to look at what I have written about it, because I want to get everything. I want to say all that I had to say about Artemisia. This self-portrait of Artemisia Gentileschi, an iconic female painter of the Italian Baroque period of the first half of 17th century, she calls this painting La Pittura, the picture, the painting. Artemisia is making an allusion here. In 1611, the aesthetician Cesare Ripa wrote his famous treatise Iconologia. In this book, he defines painting. He actually tells us what painting is. He's giving us a definition of painting. This definition is called the allegory of painting. Ripa describes the painting as a woman. There are a few symbols that Ripa speaks of that are present in this allegory of painting. These symbols are: the woman wears a pendant mask on a gold chain, showing the artist's capability of creating imitations of what they see in life, the mask. The woman wears a color-changing dress, and it's very difficult to, show how actually Artemisia achieves that sort of color-changing character of the dress. Another interesting side to note here would be the allegory of art, according to Ripa, is to be depicted in green, thus tying together painting as a part of art as well as whole. I mean, nature, green, and everything. The other property that we talk about in this, that Ripa talks about, is this. The woman, who is art personified, has unruly hair, depicting the divine frenzy of the artistic temperament, or showing the artistic conveyance of depicting works with emotion and inspiration. This is how Ripa sees it. The woman has the tools of a painter, a palette, a brush, shown in this piece being used and handled directly by the artist, while in many typical allegorical pictures, from time to time, they are just placed nearby the figure but not used. But in this one, actually Artemisia is using it. The woman, that is what Ripa said, the woman has a piece of cloth binding her mouth in the allegory, meant to symbolize the non-verbal means of expression that the painter is limited to. But notice here that when Artemisia is painting Ripa's allegory of painting, La Pittura, she is painting herself. She is embodying art. We have to pause here and look into the life of Artemisia Gentileschi. Artemisia Gentileschi was one of the very few women who got into these art academics. And possibly she managed to do that only because her father was a famous artist. And she was learning to paint under the tutelage of the great master Agostino Tassi. And as the story, the terrible tale goes, Agostino Tassi raped Artemisia at the age of 18. A long, bitter litigation followed this, and Artemisia had to appear in court of law to prove her innocence. She had to, you know, she had to prove her innocence. Thus, he was proven guilty, but he was not imprisoned. The painting, allegory of painting, La Pittura, is a protest of a raped woman who brings to the world a self portrait as an embodiment of art, painting, and beauty. This act of protest in form of self-portrait is an assertion of Artemisia's self-identity that has transformed through her deep engagement with art itself and the terrible incident of abject humiliation. Artemisia very deftly speaks of her art and herself and their unity in her being. She combines her self-deception, this depiction theoretically and practically. And this becomes possibly the greatest self-portrait ever, and the greatest self-making ever, and the greatest self-assertion ever. We could speak of other portraits, and I can go on forever. We can speak of Van Gogh's painting of the bandage, the self-portrait with the bandaged ear, which is again a portrait where uh, the artist is showing himself in his most vulnerable moment, in his moment of madness. But just see how deftly he puts his easel at the back of his bandaged ear, still trying to say that I may have gone mad, but I still paint. Look behind his painting is a Japanese painting, just making people aware that in spite of my complete madness, I'm still in the art world, in the larger world of artists. We can even talk about Frida Kahlo, who is usually painting herself all the time because she says that I'm always alone with myself and I know myself best and I paint myself. This is because she suffered from a terrible back injury, which kept her, almost a large part of her life in bed, and she used to paint. And in this picture, we see that we do not see Frida with her usual hairdo and flowers, looking very dainty, wearing the traditional Mexican gown. She is wearing the suit of her famous artist husband, Diego Rivera, who she has just divorced. And she has cut off her beautiful hair and she's sitting there looking straight at us, talking about her humiliation and her assertion of her identity as a woman, as an artist in the very, very misogynistic masculine world. I cannot but, resist the temptation of talking about a completely different kind of art, but still self-portrait. These are self-portrait photographs made by an unknown photographer called Vivienne Dorothy Mayer. I'm going to show you how she took her own photographs. She was actually taking photographs of things around her, and she surreptitiously put herself inside the photographs, sometimes reflected in a mirror, sometimes as a shadow, sometimes as seen through mirrors and through lenses, sometimes looking very dowdy, sometimes looking very confident, and mostly looking like just an ordinary person, just an ordinary woman. I would like to end by talking a little bit about Vivian Dorothy Mayers. In her photographs, we see a rather plain looking, dowdily dressed woman with a camera in her hand, taking a photograph of herself or her reflection on a shop mirror or a window, or her shadow as she captures her surroundings, which are predominantly urban. These are photographs that are actually of great historical importance. It actually gives us access to the way working class women saw America of the 50s. Vivian Mayer was an unmarried woman with no children. She was a nanny. She is as if hiding away from the limelight, and yet she's always there. You see her watching her surroundings through her lens, her tool of empowerment, a tool, a camera, a tool of a man. She watches the world as she watches her own reflection in it, sometimes as a series of reflections, sometimes as a silhouette of, sometimes as a shadow. We see her watching all these, and we see her capturing these moments of self-seeing. You know, self-portrait photographs have this other dimension as well, because you are all actually photographing self-seeing. We are attaching aesthetic properties to these photos because we are noting the historical significance of these photos, not because of their form, not because of their composition, not because of their, print quality. We are really acknowledging that, look, here is a woman who is totally marginalized, but is making a bold self assertion by using the man's tool of a camera and recording the world that she sees around her and how she places her in that world where she is unseen. I would like to end the talk by quoting from the exhibition announcement of Vivian Mayer's self-portraits at the Chroma photography website. The recurring feature that became a signature of her self-portraits, as it also did in Lee Friedler's, was the shadow. The shadow, that silhouette whose defining property is its attachment to the body, that duplicate of the body in negative, carved out of reality, has the ability to render that which is absent present. For although the shadow attests to the existence of the referent, it simultaneously obliterates its presence. Within this duality, Vivian Mayer juggled with a self on the verge of disappearance and the appearance of her double, recognizing perhaps that a self-portrait is a presence in the third person, indicates the simultaneity of that presence and its absence. What I find interesting in the works of Vivian Mayer is that she is capturing self-seeing, and not just the self, but self-seeing. And we understand how she is deftly negotiating between the third person and the first person, and the split and the collapse of the both. In this paper, we have tried to use self-portraits, paintings, and photographs to understand whether their aesthetic appreciation can be made without keeping in mind the autobiographical history in the background of which these portraits became portraits of the self. And this particular self is one who sees herself with a particular eye. All this, I hope, has brought out that epistemic purism and aesthetic purism has got something very wrong, the very idea of how we see ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sen, for the intriguing talk. We can now move towards the questions. I would like to request Ms. Diksha to kindly moderate the Q&A session.
Thank you, Sia. Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to provide some guidelines. You can type your questions in the chat box, or if you prefer to ask your question directly, simply click the raise hand button and I'll call on you to ask your question. Now I invite the participants to ask the questions. Yeah, Mr. Ranjit, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello.
Yes, sir, you're audible. You can go ahead with the question, please.
We must thank Professor Sen for giving a new dimension of self-portrait. Now, I have only one question. That is, can we say that self-awareness is having an identity inbuilt within it of the first person and the third person perspective? If this is so, this is because initially she has started by saying that art has no obligation. So this is true. This may be true in case of an artist, but for the common man, this if somebody I have having my own, I see myself in a particular way, but if somebody else always tells me that you are this, you are this, you are this, then I may be affected by his version of assessing me. So how do you react to this? Thank you, madam.
Yes, I agree with you completely. I mean, I agree with what I think is at the back of your question. We are not only do artists when they're painting themselves, not only artists are negotiating with how they're presented to themselves and how others look at them. Not only are they negotiating between the third person and first person perspective, we ourselves, when we are looking at ourselves, we are also negotiating between the third person and first person perspective. As you correctly point out, how we see ourselves are largely construed by what people say we are. Okay. Or what people say that we ought to be like. Okay. So, for example, as teachers, we are expected to be in a particular way. And this expectation creates a kind of pressure on us to become what we are expected to be, or what we expect ourselves to be, because many a time what others expect of ourselves become what we expect of ourselves. So this self-other dichotomy is more often than not obliterated. And the uniqueness that we have vis-a-vis ourselves is that we can negotiate between both these perspectives. I can have a first person perspective on me and also a third person perspective on me. And I do that every time I talk to others, okay, about myself. Whenever I use the word I, for example, I go on saying, I want this. I would like you to do this for me. I am coming to your place. Can you please bring me a cup of tea, etc., etc. If I were to refer to this I as the private person that I'm presented to myself in the first person perspective, you wouldn't understand it, would you? So when I say I, when I'm talking to you, I mean by I, the person you are seeing, the person you know, not the subjective presence that I get in my first person perspective, right? So not only painters do that, every time we open our mouth and talk about ourselves, we have to take the perspective of the listener. Otherwise, all our self ascriptions will go in vain. Nobody would understand what we are saying. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
We have a question in a chat box. Mr. Ravindra asks, is selfie a kind of self-portrait in first person?
Yes. Yes, it is. It is. It is.
I hope that answers your
The
question.
only thing is that, it is a photograph taken by oneself, of oneself, right? But the only thing is that, for example, in Vivian Mayer's photographs, you can see her taking the photograph of herself. And in selfies, you don't have that. That also is obliterated. The medium, the camera is hidden. Okay.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I hope that answers the question.
Professor
Yeah.
Madhuchandra, some people take selfies in such a way that the reflections in the mirror shows they holding the camera and all.
Yes, yes, yes. And we do that, artists do that very often because maybe, I don't know. I mean, art is open to interpretation, and what the artist's intention is what we make the intention to be. So often the reflection, the technique of depicting reflections uh, is uh, mm, is aimed at bringing out these different layers in which we are aware of ourselves, and in the different through the different layers of self depiction, layers of self reflection, in both literal and the more literary sense. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Miss Priyanka has raised her hand. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I have two questions. First is that our topic is self-awareness and the connection between purism. That as I am become self-aware, but about something, but that does mean that I am pure about that. So, what is the connection between self-aware and the kind of purism with that the relation? What is the relation between self-aware and purism first, and second is when I am
Can I answer that first, Priyanka?
okay, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was talking about two kinds of purism. One is epistemic purism about self-awareness, and aesthetic purism. Aesthetic purism claims that the aesthetic property of an artwork is purely in its form, in its color, and it has nothing to do with the artist's intention, the history of the painting, the history of the artist that might have been the reason for the artist painting the painting that she has. So, there is an art gallery in America where they believe in this sort of aesthetic purism, and they have decided that they are going to display all the paintings without having a little, placard which says who has painted them, because for them it is immaterial. But for us, for me, it is very important. It is very important when I see the painting of, the mental asylum in which uh, Van Gogh was kept in the last few years of his life. When I see that painting, I need to see written on the right of it or left of it this little piece that this is painted by Van Gogh in this year, and this is his mental asylum. And then I see those amazing orange and yellow colors and those corridors that he is painting, series of corridors and doors and doors and doors within it in a completely different way. So this is purism. And I think I spent about half an hour explaining what epistemic purism is. It is the view which says that in self awareness, we are not presented to ourselves with our autobiographical histories. Rather, we are presented to ourselves as mere subjects of awareness, completely depleted of our agency, of our personhood, of our history. We are just subjects. So this is the epistemic purism that I was talking about. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am. And second question is, when I am painting myself, in that case, my observation about myself and others that are reflected in that painting. When I am painting about others whom I have never saw, or when I am some reflection about some deities I am painting, in that case also there is some reflection of my views or my reflections, or totally that.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yes. I would
yes.
agree
And
to that. I would. I can't remember who said that every story that I have written is an autobiography. I can't remember who said this. I mean, of course, there would be a shadow of me everywhere. Whatever I touch, I leave my shadow behind. It is very difficult to detach yourself and have a kind of objective depiction of facts, and that would take another kind of lecture. This perspectival, uh, you know, uh, hmm, approach that we have towards everything that comes to us as a data. Thank you, Priyanka, for asking those questions.
thank you, ma'am. Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
Mr. Antrija, he has raised his hand. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I
Hi.
hope that you can hear me and see me very
I
well.
can.
Thank you for your very interesting lecture. I found it very interesting because I myself write on this topic, especially for my PhD thesis. It's on philosophical egology, and so the I in Kant and Husserl and Fichte and so on. And I am a purist in the group of people that you criticized. My is not. I have a question, but not so much a question, more an idea, and I would like to hear your opinion on that. You said that the purist conception of self-consciousness, or the epistemic purity, got something wrong. That it is not a correct view of self-consciousness. My idea in my work is that they are actually complementary. The pure self-consciousness, or the pure self-awareness, and the epistemic self-consciousness. The one regards the content of consciousness and the self-knowledge, while the other one and presupposes, the latter presupposes the former, the pure self-consciousness. For instance, at one point you said that to myself, I can have a first person standpoint, viewpoint, and a third person one. The one that I see myself in the eyes of the other. So, for example, I see that a bit problematic because I agree with you, but to be able to see that I am actually in the eyes of the other. So, for example, I recognize myself in the eyes of the other. So, how do I know about whom the other is speaking? Well, he is speaking about myself. So there has to be a more innate relation to myself so that I can realize that the other is talking about me. Now, I agree with you, but I would say that the ability to have a third person perspective on oneself actually presupposes, as a condition of possibility in Kantian sense, the first person perspective.
Yes.
And I wouldn't say the other point, but the other side of that is that self-consciousness need not be epistemic. So that is, I think, a broad misconception that self-consciousness is actually epistemic. For example, take the problem of the Delphic maxim gnoti se auton, or know thyself, that the Greeks told us. So when I am discovering something about myself, a property, for example, as Caravaggio, you mentioned that he was actually very angry. So if I'm realizing that I am actually a very angry person, I am discovering a disposition of myself. But in order to know that I myself am the object of investigation, or that the property is actually mine and not someone else's, the self-consciousness is presupposed in self-knowledge. So that's my comment, my idea.
Thank you, Andrija. I know what you're talking about. Exactly. Yeah, sure. In some writings, this is what is called pre-reflective self-awareness, right? Which sort of lies at the foundation of my proposal that full-blooded, let's say, full-blooded self-awareness and its uniqueness is constituted by one's realization that that kind of pre-reflective I is the I in the other's I, right? That one has to sort of have something in one hand in order to say that that is the thing that I have, that is the same as the thing that I have in the other hand. That is your point, right?
Yes.
So I do agree with you. But let me just add that, that I have in my hand, in my left hand, and which I realize is the one that you are calling Madhucchanda, or you are seeing now, or you have heard for the last few minutes. This one that I have in my hand, this depleted I, okay, which I need to have in order to, really understand this collapse, this identity, this duality of perspective that I have within me, that is not the person I am. The person that I am emerges from my realization of this. Okay.
I agree with you that is completely as Husserlian, the concrete ego or the monad, yes, and the pure ego or the I. Yes, no, I agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat box. Aditi asks, do you think it's problematic to be one's own beholder? Does yoga contribute in synthesizing parts of the self?
I don't know if I understand the question. I mean, there is no problem in being one's own beholder. But the second half of the question, are you talking about different, layers of the self? And when one is observing oneself, it is only one layer of oneself observing the other? Yeah, okay, I get it. Yes, I understand. Yes, sure, that could be a way of understanding how you can see oneself, yourself. Who is seeing who? Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Yeah, Aditi has raised her hand. You can go ahead and ask the question.
Hello, ma'am. Not a question exactly, but a discussion maybe. I would like your opinion on some people who are maybe suffering from quote unquote some mental disorders or mental issues and are unsure about the very concept of self and are struggling with finding the I. And so, what would be your opinions about them interacting with the world and their perspective about interactions with the third person, the first person perspective, where they don't know the first person perspective, and their interactions from the third person perspective, if that makes sense? Thank you.
First of all, this is a question for psychologists. So I should not say anything about it. Secondly, I don't think that quote unquote mental disturbances are created only when one is unable to see oneself from the first person perspective. Because there could be other reasons for having, problems. Of course, there would be a great amount of problem due to our inability to negotiate between how we see ourselves and how others see ourselves and how others expect ourselves to see ourselves and how we expect others to see ourselves. Much of the heartaches and the problems that we face in our life in negotiating with the other is to do with this. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Diksha, can I just comment? Is somebody else is there in the queue? Is there anyone in the queue?
Yeah, we have a question.
Please go ahead. I didn't notice. Please go ahead.
Yeah, it just okay. Does Gayatri Paul ask, does help language foster the notion of slim I in some manner in the case of epistemic purism?
Sorry, can you say that again? Gayatri, are you there? Can you ask the question yourself?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I was asking whether language helps foster the sort of slim I that you were discussing in epistemic purism.
Yes, it does. It does. It does. If you approach the word I from a completely linguistic point of view, it is regarded as a demonstrative, or rather as an indexical, and it is seen as a word that refers to the person concerned without specifying any kind of descriptive condition which a person needs to satisfy in order to be the reference of the word I. You see? So it is something like that or this, where you need not say what the thing needs to qualify in order to be called this or that. So this kind of, this kind of linguistic understanding of the word I has led to this kind of slim conception of the I. And of course, there is the great Cartesian tradition that is, instrumental in seeing the I in this way. Gayatri, does that answer you?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
We have one more question in the chat box. Could you please elaborate a little on the minimal I self, which you referred to while taking the example of a person with dementia? It is asked by Aruvi.
I was not talking about a person with dementia. That is a far more complicated case. Often people say that, take away everything from you. Take away your name, take away your history, take away who you are, what you do, who your father and mother is, who your husband is, who your children is, which country you belong to. Take everything away. Suppose someone has hit your head and you have an amnesia, you don't know who you are, and yet you can say that, who am I? You can ask this question, who am I? And then who is this I that you are aware of, and you're asking for its identity? So you still have a kind of I sense. And this I sense is a kind of mere subjective presence, that I am a subject and I need to know who I am. This is a kind of thought experiment which sort of reveals that this is the kind of minimal sense of self that we have. Okay. So take away all the things that I know about myself, that my name is Madhucchanda Sen, that I live in Kolkata, I teach in Jadavpur University, I have studied philosophy for a very long time, etc. You take away everything, and whatever is left is what I think myself to be. But is that who I am? That is the question. Is that person ever given to me?
Yes, Aruvi, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, ma'am. And just a follow-up. So is that residual, this lingering question of what I am or who I am when you take away everything else, is that residue kind of then becomes a necessity to qualify as a subject? Or as a creator that can be considered as a subject?
I'm not quite sure I understand you, Aruvi. Can you elaborate your question a little bit more?
Yeah. So just when you were saying about the minimal self as that which remains when you take away all the attributes, like the person is so and so, like I am so and so. So like when we wipe everything off and I kind of maybe wake up from a blank slate, and then there is this disposition to ask what I am, or like what is the point, like what am I doing here, or the basic question of what I am. So is this self-reflexive what I am? This does it? My question is, does this residue because I understand when you said it as a residue because that remains, right? So when you have taken everything away, so does this residue qualify one or anything to be a subject?
Many people would say that, yes, that is what makes a person a subject. But my question is, does that make the subject a person? That is my question.
Okay, so not
I am really toying with the idea of a person, which is, I think, a little more messy and a little richer than the concept of a subject. And I mean, you may accept that minimal self is the subject, and like Andrija, you might say that you have to at least theoretically accept such a subject, or else how do you explain the dichotomy between the first person and third person perspective, and how can you even say that within ourselves we have both? But my what I would like to say is that, that minimal subject doesn't interest me, because it seems to me, you can admit so many things. I mean, because, logically you need to admit many things. But my question is, does that minimal I or subject move things around? Does it make any difference? Because the person that I keep talking about, the person that I am trying to find out when I ask that is the subject that person is the agent. That person is the person you assign responsibility. That person is the person who is self-conscious. In the humdrum sense, is self-conscious. How am I looking? Am I looking pretty? Self-conscious. Am I speaking properly? Self-conscious. Have I done the right thing? Etc. So this is the person that I'm looking for. And it seems to me that when we are aware of ourselves, more often than not, we are aware of a person. And this self-awareness is a self-becoming, because we are becoming the person that we are through these acts of self-awareness. And these acts are pretty much evaluative. That was what I was trying to say. Okay? But then again, Andrija's point stays. And so does, the linguist's understanding of the indexical I, what it actually is telling us. It still is there, because there seems to be one level of our understanding and communication where that I has some kind of role. But for me, it is not an interesting one, because that is not the person that I want to talk about. And that is not who I am aware of when I am so happy with myself or so ashamed of myself. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Aruvi.
Hello. In this case, I'm referring to your saying of artificial self-identity and logical self-identity. So in order to resolve the issue that we are discussing right now, we can bring that difference of artificial self-identity and logical self-identity.
I wouldn't call it artificial. Logical self-identity, okay, but artificial seems to be, false. But there is no false here. There are only stories to be told.
Yeah.
In different styles. I'm really so happy that you all asked so many questions. I feel grateful. Thank you.
Yes, Professor Koshi, you can go ahead, because there are no more questions.
Thank you. I mean, it's not so much of a question, just a comment. I mean, just wanted to bring this to Professor Madhuchanda's thing. No, as I was listening to you, I was reminded of this, debate in philosophy of social sciences, particularly, this interpretative social sciences firsthand. Alfred Schutz and all over, they were trying to bring the subjective dimensions into the domain of social sciences, how to bring that aspect, the first person aspects to the discourse of science, which is third person. Here you can see exactly the reverse move, how to bring the third person aspects into the first person artistic
right,
so
exactly.
So I was just thinking
that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point.
Just
Yeah, I'll think about it, Koshi.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So we'll wind up our question answer session. Thank you all for your thoughtful questions. Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful responses. If you have remaining questions or questions that could not be addressed, please feel free to reach out to the speaker through email. The email address is posted in the chat box. Thank you, and over to you, Sia.
Thank you, Diksha. Thank you, ma'am, for the thought-provoking discussion. I would now invite Akash to kindly propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sia. Such a wonderful session. Now we have arrived at the final part of the lecture. On behalf of School of Sanskrit Philosophy and Indic Studies, I extend our heartfelt gratitude towards Professor Madhucchanda Sen. Thank you very much, ma'am, for the wonderful lecture. I would also like to thank Professor Koshi Tarakan, the Dean of School of Sanskrit Philosophy and Indic Studies. Without your support, sir, these lectures wouldn't be possible. I would also like to thank all the faculty members and research scholars at the School of Sanskrit Philosophy and Indic Studies. And the greatest thank of all to all the attendees or all the participants present from Goa University, other universities, other colleges, and all different institutes. Thank you all for attending this lecture and making this session such a successful one. I also thank all the people involved in promotion of the event and making this event a possibility. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for patiently hearing me for such a long time. Thank you.
And from my side, special thanks, Professor Madhucchanda, for
and I hope to see you all in person in Goa one day.
Sure. You should. We should think of some occasion for it. So yeah, thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Namaskar.